I just quickly want to welcome Assemblyman Scott Gray. Here, I forgot I'm short. Okay. I just want to quickly, yes, welcome Assemblyman Scott Gray. He's been instrumental in our protection of Blind Bay. And thank you for joining us. Our next speaker is Dr. Kate Cleary, a conservation biologist researching the complex relationships between biodiversity and agriculture, improving the connectivity for wildlife through road ecology studies. Dr. Cleary holds a PhD in conservation genetics and also served as a Peace Corps volunteer, this time in Guatemala, and is currently the Assistant Professor of Environmental Studies at SUNY Potsdam.
Thank you, Bridget. I actually can see you, lucky me. Oh, because the lights are on still. So that's nice. So thank you, Bridget, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. What I'm going to talk to you all about today is, let me just figure this out, a little bit about, it's actually a great follow-up from Glenn's project in the sense that it's also about terrestrial wildlife connectivity. So why is connectivity important? I mean, I think that I have a pretty sympathetic audience in this room, right, as to why connectivity is important, but just really briefly, you know, both terrestrial and aquatic animals now have to move through so many human-dominated landscapes to get to, as Glenn was saying, their breeding grounds or their wintering grounds or whatever biological need they have. And animals, one thing that encourages me is animals are really clever. Like those clever raccoons digging under the fence, or the pronghorn, you know, sneaking under the fences to do their famous migration out west. Animals like the snow geese that have incredibly far migrations, you know, seem fairly undaunted by suburban development and will just spend the night there in the water. And of course, aquatic migration, like if anyone's ever been to the Ballard Locks in Seattle, it's amazing to watch the salmon run through there. So they just need a little help. They will migrate through human-dominated areas. Animals will still move through these spaces like we have here around the St. Lawrence River if we just help them a little. So, how connected is our region? And it might take you a minute to orient there, right? Because I think at least, you know, I'm from downstate New York. I was born in the city. And so I actually didn't know there was anything north of Albany until I was about 35. And now I live up here. But I'm not used to seeing us as positioned as like the southernmost part of a map. So, but that's where we are in this map, right? So we're down there, the Adirondack Park is down there at the south, and this is a map from the Staying Connected Initiative, which many of you in the audience might be familiar with their organization. And they are an organization that works kind of at the landscape scale in the northeastern North America to maintain connectivity between these landscapes. And so one thing that, you know, up until recently has been missing from this map, and the corridor I'm going to talk about, is the Algonquin to Adirondack Biological Corridor. And that corridor is, so I'm here representing SUNY Potsdam, where I'm a professor, but also I'm the president of the board of the US side of the Algonquin to Adirondack Collaborative. And that's what's motivated this research I'm going to tell you about. So how come we're not on their map? What the heck? You never like to see that you're not even on the map. Well, so why weren't we on the map? Well, the motivation for our biological corridor becoming like a nonprofit that protected the corridor back in 1998, when some of you might have been part of, or at least remember when moose were reintroduced at Huntington State Forest and down in the Adirondacks. And moose were released and they were radio colored, and all of them died except for Alice, who you can see the red line there. She went all the way north, all the way up, crossed the St. Lawrence, and went all the way up to Algonquin Park. And that's not her in the picture. I just think that's a cute picture. So yes, she traveled all that way, and she did, to the best of her knowledge, she didn't reproduce there, so she didn't establish genetic connectivity, but she was kind of the proof of concept and the inspiration for people to notice. It got a lot of press coverage, and people said, hey, we should protect this passageway. It's transnational, which presents certain challenges, but we should make sure that this pathway is there and is intact so that wildlife, especially in the face of climate change, have a space to migrate northwards. And so in 2005, we formed, I wasn't there, but formed the Algonquin to Adirondacks Collaborative. And so we are a nonprofit. I hope some of you have heard of us. I know I've met a few of our staunch supporters here in the audience today, like Margot Miller. But we are a U.S.-Canadian First Nations partner organization. We work with scientists, policymakers, and a variety of conservation groups to protect and enhance the unique ecological features and functions of the A to A region. So our goal is to have an ecologically connected biological corridor in this region, which certainly, relates to the St. Lawrence River, which bisects the region. So I'm going to focus on just one project today, but just broadly, some of our projects that we work on, we have a binational science symposium, so every other year we hold it in the US once and Canada once, and we go back and forth, and it's actually right here in the same room on April 11th, so mark your calendars if you're interested in coming back to this great venue. And we also have a trail and a trail app, so you can do a through hike, and we've had several people do a through hike and document it. The Adirondack Explorer has done a bunch of articles on it. And then we have a fairly long, 15-year history of doing road ecology work in Ontario. So that right to roam graphic is from our website, but essentially, I'll tell you a little bit about it in a few slides. So we never had a strong presence on the US side, and that's, it's just because we're two different countries, and so you have to apply for a whole different tax status on this side, and the organization had never done it. And so during COVID, I decided to do that, and we got tax status, and that's more exciting than it sounds because it means you can get money. So once we had tax status, we were able to apply for grants, and we started getting a few small grants, and we had a workshop with our US side partners to say, we're a partner organization, what do you want us to do? And the priorities were mapping and road ecology. So we put together a team, and these are just some of the great folks on the team. We have a lot of collaborators. We have only one full-time staff member and one intern, so we definitely rely a lot on our collaborators and volunteers. So we put together this team of collaborators, and we had several goals for this project. We wanted to do mapping and road ecology as our partners had asked for, but I'm just going to talk about one piece of the project today because of the time. Also, Emma, I cannot see you, so if you tell me when I'm getting towards the end of the time.
Look down here, I'll tell you 3 minutes.
Oh,
3 minutes and 1
great.
minute.
Oh, you have a sign, great, thank you. Okay, so our goal was basically to improve fine-scale understanding of wildlife connectivity on the US side and eventually improve it, right? So first thing that we did, this was work that we did last summer with the support of a Nature Conservancy grant. We modeled habitat corridors. Now you can see here, the A to A corridor, you're seeing the outline of it there, and then all the little lines in there, and the purple areas are protected areas, and the lines between them are the path of least resistance for wildlife to move through based on those 4 species groups. That's a whole project in and of itself, and I'm not going to talk a lot about that project today, but that mapping has already proved useful, and we've disseminated that to a lot of our partners to utilize in conservation work. But then what we wanted to do also was right here at the pinch point of the corridor, we wanted to actually work at a smaller scale to look at how can we ensure that animals can cross the road if they're trying to move north or south. So we did this road ecology study. So I think most people in this room are pretty familiar with what road ecology is, but it's just looking at the positive and negative effects of roads on ecosystems. And I don't know if people can ever realize how many roads we have in the United States and the density of the road system in the United States. So here we have roads in yellow, they're glowing. And we're lucky to live in a place with very few roads, but we still have a lot of roads. So I wrote this down in case I forgot it, but according to our collaborators in Albany, in the Department of Transportation in Albany, we have 239,000 miles of public roads in New York State. And registered, of only the collisions that are reported to the DOT, there's more than 70,000 collisions just with deer. So it's a huge number. And every one of those is estimated to cost around $19,000 to insurance companies, to the car owners, and damages to whatever property, removing the deer. So it's something that multiple stakeholders are interested in mitigating, right? Not just like wildlife biologists who want to save animals. The DOT has a vested interest in making roads more crossable for animals. So how did we pick the area we were going to do this study? Well, if you look at the red line so if you look at this map, you can see where we are. Well, Alex Bay is on the map there. And that red line up in the Canadian side, on the Ontario side, is where the Canadian side of ATA has been conducting a road ecology study since 2010. And they basically, well, you can see that number they estimated, more than 16,000 vertebrates killed by traffic along that red line segment, which is like about 24 miles. Most of those are frogs, but frogs' lives matter. So we do care about them too. And so we've actually made really good progress on the Canadian side. Like I had that graphic up there before, so since 2010, you cannot see it very well on the bottom, but you can go to our website and read the whole report. We've identified 4 priority areas for wildlife overpasses or underpasses that the Ministry of Transportation should build in order to reduce this kind of like wildlife massacre. And we've gotten money from Parks Canada to help spread this idea and promote it, and that's the stage we're in on the Canadian side now. So on the US side though, we're like, well, we don't know anything really. We haven't done this study. So in 2023, my colleague Bill Brown and I, we wrote a grant to the Nature Conservancy to fund this study. And so we started a road ecology study. I don't know if you can see this. I made this and I was so proud of it, but look, see those yellow lines? Woo. Cool, right? That's our study area. So what we want to know, are there statistically significant wildlife mortality hotspots along that area? Do they vary by taxa or type of animal? And can land cover on either side of the road predict where wildlife mortality hotspots will occur? So, Glenn talked a bit about surveying the roads and seeing where the blanding turtles are crossing. In this case, we're just expanding that out to all animals, but with a specific road area. So to do this, I feel like a lot of the presentations, at least all the people from SUNY Potsdam, we really like going along roads and like measuring all the disasters that are happening. I just noticed that today. So my colleague, Dr. Pearson, who spoke earlier, she's looking at purple loosestrife. So we got a crew together and we collaborated with Clarkson C3G, which I know Donna Koala's in this room, so thanks to her for collaborating and organizing a lot of that work. And we had students out there and myself basically riding our bikes all the way down one side of the road from about Chippewa Bay to Alex Bay and all the way back up the other side, and marking every single animal we found dead on the road. And I don't mean just like the big mammals. They're mostly picked up by the DOT and they're not there anymore. But everything from birds to frogs to snakes, even like you get really good at it, so you see a little shred of like a frog's foot and you have to stop and record that. So this is the kind of data, a lot of road ecology work is done from cars. You can't get this kind of data from a car. So we did it by bike. And I'll show you this data in more detail later, but I just wanted to also add that we're really grateful to our collaborators in the Department of Transportation because we asked them, like, look, we can only ride our bikes in a certain area because logistically and like physically it's really hot. You can't go, it takes a whole day to ride that. You're stopping constantly, so it actually takes a whole day to ride that stretch. But we said, you guys are picking the roadkill off the road anyway. Could you write that data down for us? And they said yes. So the blue dots that go up to I want to say they go all the way up to Ogdensburg, but, or maybe like Morristown. What's that little town name? I can't see it. Nobody can. Up to there. And we could never have ridden our bikes on that whole area, but we have their data. So every month they send us their data. Now, I'll get back to DOT in a second, but this is just our bike data. So from 2023 to 2024, we had these numbers of mortalities. So in the it's showing the percentages on the pie graph, but the raw numbers are over on the right. So 73% frogs, or more than 1,300 frogs we found dead on those roads. Snakes, 81 snakes, 167 turtles, 136 mammals, even after the DOT has picked up all the big mammals. And birds, somewhat surprising, they didn't think they'd have such a high number of birds, but 110 birds. And we combined the data because the percentages were approximately the same for species groups in both years. And I just wanted to highlight a few species of conservation concern that we found on the road. So the wood turtle, we found a fair number of wood turtles, and they are a special concern in New York and then endangered in Ontario. And so for each of these pictures, I have like a picture of them when they're alive, and then like the actual thing that we get to see on the right, which is a little more gruesome. The Blandings turtle, so the species that Glenn was just talking to you about, we did find them, we found 2 gravid females, so with eggs in them, dead on the side of the road, which made me very sad, you can see. And I actually took that picture to text to Glenn, and he was sad too. So they're definitely impacted by roads everywhere, but even in this region, it's happening right here. And then birds, so the golden winged warbler, this is a bird that's special concern in New York and Ontario, so we did find not a lot. I mean, honestly, I want to say like 4, but it's just a short stretch of road. So just a few highlighted species, but okay, so what can we do? I mean, everybody knows there's roadkill. We're trying to find where the roadkill is so we can mitigate it. So how can we mitigate it? Well, Banff National Park, when people think of wildlife overpasses or helping wildlife cross the road, they often think of these really glamorous things like this. This is the most famous one. If you Google wildlife overpasses, that one will come up. It's like, I don't remember how many millions of dollars, I want to say, bridge, and then over here on the right, you can see another one that was done in Santa Monica. Somebody endowed it, so their name is on it. That's great, but we can't do those everywhere. It's too expensive, and the DOT doesn't want to do that. So what's the other option? So I want to share with you something really cool that the Nature Conservancy has been doing down in the Tug Hill area, and that is what we hope we can do up here to help wildlife be able to cross more. So Emma, if you could just play that.
The Critter Shelf is a steel mesh platform bolted to the inside of a culvert that serves as a walkway for animals to traverse the culvert underneath the road safely. Culverts are often unseen. They're the pipes underneath our roadways that pass streams or storm water. You don't often associate them with wildlife, but conservationists and highway departments are increasingly seeing their value to serve as safe passageways underneath the roadway.
It is a safety issue. People stop or swerve for wildlife. So finding a way to get wildlife safely across the road is important because wildlife's important to our society.
Keeping forests connected becomes increasingly important as we begin to think about climate change. Globally, wildlife are seeing declines, and we have a chance to keep our wildlife populations healthy and connected. Areas even the size of the Adirondacks risk becoming isolated islands if they're not connected to other nearby forests.
This is a relatively cheap way to add something in as a benefit for wildlife and reduce impacts to motorists.
Our partnership with the Department of Transportation is great because we can help prioritize the most important areas for wildlife movement and drive investments to those areas.
It takes a group of people to bring that information together so that we can come to the best solutions.
This particular project is really exciting to see results and test it out.
It's exciting because this is where the bigger impacts happen. We could do a lot in this field. Transportation is an area where there's resources, where people are building things, and we can build things for wildlife.
This could be a model for the rest of the state and the region. People are really looking for these types of practical, low-cost solutions that have the potential to make a real difference.
Okay. So you can see they partner with Staying Connected as well. So I really love that video and I use it a lot because I think it just shows basically it doesn't have to be, you don't have to write it off as impossibly expensive. The number that Ed France, the guy who was on that video, told me that they cost about 20 grand to install one of those critter shelves. That's a definitely achievable amount of money, right? Now you still have to work with the Department of Transportation to coordinate with their plans and, you know, their 5-year management plan, so it has to be slotted in to when they're going to update that culvert anyway. But it's definitely manageable and achievable. So where should we put them? That was one of the big points of our study. So I'm not going to go into the details of how we did this, but essentially, so along that same study area, what we did was we took all that data that we had collected, and we used statistical approaches to identify hotspots of wildlife mortality. And so since we're not looking at one species, endangered species, to try and protect it, we're looking at all species to see, like, where can we get the most bang for our buck putting in an underpass. So hopefully, fingers crossed, it would be at the same spot. So is it? Guess. No, but there's some major like problem zones. So if you kind of keep your eye on the redder areas, I'm going to go through here. So frogs, snakes, turtles, birds, mammals. So, and then here's all wildlife. So I will say mammals, you really have to take with a grain of salt because I didn't integrate the DOT data into this, so it's just the smaller mammals that we found, not the bigger ones the DOT takes off. So if we look at this, of course, a lot of it is driven by frogs because frogs are the largest one, but if we go back, it's like frogs, snakes, and turtles have some similarities in the areas that are hotspots. So we're going to be working further. Like I said, we just finished this field work in September 2024, so these are our results so far, but we're continuing to work on this to figure out where would be some of the best spots to, it's some of these spots, but which ones are we going to identify as our recommended areas? And one thing we are also working on is, so this was very time intensive and laborious, so wouldn't it be great if you could have a model that you just applied to other areas and then you didn't have to ride your bike along the highway? So we are working on this piece now, essentially land cover classifications of all the areas along the road and then trying to see whether those predict the hotspots. And some preliminary results that we have, it seems kind of in alignment with, things that make ecological sense because of wetlands. So there's more wildlife roadkill mortality when there's less development, more forest, less agriculture, and more wetlands. Ecologically, that makes sense, but it's different when you split it out across taxa, but if you want to do one for all the wildlife, this is what you look for. So now we are working on this. We have camera traps out, so we also want cute pictures of animals going under the road, so we have this little project where we put 9 cameras out at bridges and culverts in the study area. So some of the ones you drove over to get here, we have cameras there, and 9 cameras at random locations. Basically, we're trying to look at whether the current infrastructure is being used by species and what species and when, and use that in combination with our data to see, where might be the best areas that would be appropriate for an upgrade that would help wildlife to cross. And just to give you an idea of some of these places, I mean, like here's a typical bridge. Unless you fish, you probably don't spend a lot of time under bridges, but I do, and I'll tell you, it's pretty nice under there. It's nice and cool, and there's a nice view, but it's pretty steep, right? So like if you're an animal, if you're a deer, you're not gonna go across that. It's just too steep. And at the top, there's a flat area, but it's too short. The ceiling's too low. So it doesn't take much modification, and it's no structural damage to, like it's not gonna affect the engineering stability of the bridge to put out some riprap and put something on top of it to make that flatter. So we're looking for minor modifications that would help, not major ones like the overpass in Banff. And then another thing that I still need to analyze the data from the DOT. So their data was collected just on pieces of paper. And so we've mapped all that data, but I still have to analyze it. But we have basically, I made this little graph for folks to see, like, this is the difference between what the DOT, so like it would be awesome if we could get just the DOT data on where they pick up roadkill around the state, and then we just know all of this, right? Done. Except they pick up 94% mammals. And from our work, that represents 8% of the roadkill. That makes sense. They're just picking up the things that are going to cause future collisions and problems, right? But it's not representative of what's actually happening. So we're going to combine that data and look at it. I had this dream that the DOT data hotspots could predict would align with our hotspots that would create a really useful model for the future, but I don't think so. I'll let you know. Doesn't look like it. So that's it. That's as far as we've gotten. I look forward to updating you as we find more results on this project. And I want to say thank you to all the partners. So like I said, Algonquin to Adirondacks Collaborative, we have 1 full-time staff member, so all of this work requires our really active board and also a lot of collaborators. Tilt has been an awesome collaborator for us, and thank you to as has the Department of Transportation, and we've had some great funders as well, so we really appreciate that. And also just to, again, I think I put one more thing on here. Oh yeah, so if you want to learn more about A to A, that's a QR code up there at the top. So if you want to come back to our April 11th symposium here, we have a somewhat similar, it's a similar event, except we basically focus on trying to bring a lot of folks from Canada and the US together to talk about research, all kinds of research being done in the A to A corridor. And if you want to see more, well, this article is from January of last year, an article in the Adirondack Explorer that kind of tells you more details on the project. So yeah, thank you for taking a little time to learn about roadkill. Oh, questions. Oh yeah, I don't know if we have a couple minutes for questions. Yeah. I know. Are you saying, did you say, I couldn't hear you, larger wildlife? Oh, I see what you're saying. That's interesting. I guess my answer to that would be, is mortality than that greater than mortality caused by cars? Yeah. Sounds like they're pretty tricky. I think they might. But yeah, I never actually thought of that, but I think the only way to answer that would be to evaluate like whether or not the mortality was higher than the road mortality it was mitigating. Yeah.
How does solar farms affect the corridor?
I don't know the answer, but I'm interested in the answer. So back to our mapping work that we did, one of the pieces so when we were doing the mapping project that I mentioned early in the beginning, we had to parameterize the resistance surfaces. So we had to say, like, on the map, what's going to be hard for animals to go through or not. And so we didn't do that based on subjective ideas, but based on a model built by the New Hampshire Department of Transportation. And the solar farms I know were put in there as a high resistance value, but I don't know whether that was based on like actual radio collaring animals and watching them avoid or expert opinion. And those are two really different ways to judge, right? So I guess my answer would be many biologists think that they're hard to move through for larger animals, but probably not for smaller animals. Other questions? Okay. Thank you.